Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, Des Moines Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Witkoff Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. I mean, there are restaurateurs and there are restaurateurs. There are people who are considered the leading restaurateurs. But you know what's more interesting? You need a restaurateur who's New York City born and bred. And I got the guy today, Drew Nieporent, who is a New York City kid who runs restaurants in New York and around the world, and I'm so happy that you're here today.
Good to be here, Michael.
So you are 55?
Will be in June.
You'll be 55 in June. You were born in Mount Sinai Hospital.
That's right.
And you grew up in Stuytown.
Well, Peter Cooper.
Oh, okay.
You know, we had air conditioning.
That's right. You had air conditioning as opposed to Stuytown.
My mother lived there for almost 43 years. I actually did live in Stuyvesant Town after graduation, so I've lived in both places.
But we have to, before we get to the graduation, we have to talk. So you were born over there.
Born in Peter Cooper, 23rd Street, last building.
And the interesting situation is that your father was an attorney who worked for the State Liquor Authority.
That's right.
Licensing restaurants, which is very interesting.
That's the way it works.
And your mother, Sybil Trent, was with radio.
My mother was a child actress. And on a very popular show of its time before television.
Let's Pretend?
Well, Let's Pretend. She used to sing the theme song, Cream of Wheat is so good to eat, yes, we have it every day.
That's why you ate.
That's part of the theater right there.
So you know, you're growing up in Stuytown, you went to PS?
PS 40, hi there, Sporty, I'm from 40. And across the street was Junior High School 104, Simon Baruch.
Now, you stayed in the neighborhood.
Yes.
And you even passed the admission, you got into Stuyvesant.
That's right. You have to, you know, it's a specialized high school, Stuyvesant High School. One of my classmates, David Axelrod, with the president. Another one, Paul Reiser, mad about you. But that was the year they also started letting women. So there were a lot of mothers of young boys like me whose sons, you know, whose child did not get into Stuyvesant that year.
Now, when we were getting together, you said that your mother and father loved to eat.
Yes.
And you, growing up, you go to all these restaurants. You said,
well, I think in life you're exposed to things. If your parents love music and there's a piano in the house and you're exposed to music, you might gravitate towards music. In my situation, my father worked for the State Liquor Authority, and guess what? He had a way of taking the application from the bottom of the pile to the top of the pile, which endeared him to many restaurateurs of many ethnic backgrounds, and they all said, Andy, why don't you take your family in for dinner tonight? So at a very young age, I had this exposure to the theater of dining, and I knew immediately, Michael, that this is what I wanted to do. And I mean, we're talking about the great restaurants of the 60s, where these were very authentic French, Italian, Chinese.
Well, you said
German.
The guys came off the boat, you know.
Literally, you know, these were people who found their way and brought this incredible food, they're part of their culture with them. And we're talking about restaurants like Le Pavillon, which was a a major restaurant in New York that basically spawned so many great French restaurants. We're talking about dozens of restaurants, even on Restaurant Row, where you could see Swiss restaurateurs or German restaurateurs, and we go there before theater. But as a child, I was sitting there and it was wondrous to me. How did the food come looking like this, and it tasted so good? And my mother, by the way, was a terrible cook, so eating out in restaurants was fantastic for us.
Now, your first encounter in the restaurant business was at the duck joint?
Well, here's the way it worked. As a student at Stuyvesant High School, I actually worked at McDonald's.
No, I know, but which one was first? Duck?
Well, McDonald's was first because
you were a grill man, I think.
Quarter-pound grill man. The McDonald's had made sort of an early entry into the urban areas, and this was a store right up the block from where we
23rd
lived.
Street and First Avenue, close
23rd
by.
and First, and it was fun working at McDonald's, an invaluable experience. But one of these restaurants that I talked to you about, Paul Steinler, who was Czechoslovakian, but had been a chef at the Tower Suite and had worked for Joe Baum and George Lang, he broke off and he opened something called the Duck Joint on First Avenue, 73rd Street, where Campagnolo is now, I believe, for many years. And I said to my father, I said, I want to be a chef. I want to work in restaurants. And so my father set this up with Paul Steinler. And of course, the day I go to work there, Paul's son, has me on the floor scrubbing tiles and doing everything but cooking. And I come back the first day and say, Dad, this is not good. I'm not going to do this anymore. This is not what I expected. But, like most apprenticeships, you have to start at the very bottom and you do all the grunt work.
So you graduated Stuyvesant, where most of the people said, I'm going to become a physician, I'm going to be an attorney.
Smarter than me.
Okay, and you decide to go to Cornell.
Yes.
Now, you could have gone to the Aggie school, but you went to the Cornell Hospitality.
Well, I was lucky to get into Cornell. I mean, really what it had become was I wanted to go to a cooking school. And I thought I was on my way to Europe to go to Lausanne and wear the nice toque blanche and learn how to be Paul Bocuse. And then one of the mothers said, oh, Drew was interested in hotel schools. He should apply to Cornell. And I laughed at that because at Stuyvesant, my grade point average, I was in the lower percentile, and all my fellow students were applying to Princeton, Yale, and Dartmouth, and I was applying to state universities. But I did apply to Cornell, and I got in. And it was the hotel school, not the ag school. It was the more expensive way to go.
The interesting thing you were telling me at Cornell, they had this great little summer program, and you got to work on a Norwegian boat.
Oh, the most amazing thing, walking through the corridors of school one day, I saw a little posting looking for 6 students trained in Russian service to sail to the following ports: Oslo, Leningrad, Dublin, Norway, all over Norway and Scandinavia. And I was 18 years old. It was my freshman year. And I called the notice, and in June of 1974, set sail on the MS Vistafjord for a 42-day cruise, 7 days a week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, working in a 600-seat dining room with 60 waiters. None of them were American.
Because of your experience that you told me that you really didn't have at the Concord and the Catskills, right?
Right. I didn't have, I sort of
you
bluffed my way that I had this Russian service experience. But Russian service is what you see in the hotels when they serve you from a platter to a plate in a banquet style. But I knew what it was. I had never held a fork and a spoon and served from a 20-pound silver tray, a chicken breast onto a plate, and you learn rather quickly.
Now, you also said, since you like eating, you know, and you've had ups and downs and you weight over there,
yes.
you said there was the time, was it the first year that going down the escalator with the desserts?
Yeah, I mean, the kitchen...
30 days, 42 pounds?
Well, the truth is that these menus changed every day on the cruise ship. And there were, all this culinary wizardry that I was being exposed to for the first time. And of course, I had to taste everything, get that sensory pleasure, and process it for my experience. So the kitchen was actually down a level, and you went by escalator. So I think if you can picture the escalator going up, and I'm going like this with a soup, the escalator down, and I'm shoving pastry from breakfast in my mouth or lamb chops from lunch. And I gained almost a pound a day, 30 pounds in 42-day cruise.
It was a good time.
It was.
Now,
I learned a lot. I learned a lot.
You did that for 2 years, and then you got a job at the legendary Maxwell's Plum one summer.
The cruise ship experiences were amazing. I would come back, and I'd seen the world. It was almost like my military it's, you know, luckily I never had to serve in the military, but going overseas and seeing things and being paid for it and eating, it was amazing. But one summer, I decided to work in New York City, the legendary Maxwell's Plum, one of the busiest restaurants.
200 items on the menu.
Huge menu. Everything from chow fun to couscous to, 200 items, tiny little kitchen. But I worked there as a steward would get up 5:30, 6 in the morning, receive all the goods. I was responsible for the liquor pools, the wine cellar. They had a terrific wine list there. This was a tremendous experience for me. And then at lunch, we used to serve a buffet at front of the bar. And the bar, of course, at Maxwell's Plum was a very famous singles bar. Maxwell's Plum was owned by Warner Leroy, who later in 1976 decided to take over the Tavern on the Green, which obviously we know just closed.
What happens is, people go to the Cornell School and they get these jobs at Hyatt, they get these jobs all over. And what happens to Drew?
Well, I was such a brilliant student, so prolific in my activities that...
And a great chef.
Well, I was a teaching assistant actually for a couple of the courses.
The onion soup?
Oh, well, that was something, the disappointment about Cornell, keeping in mind that I thought it was a hotel school like modeled after the ones in Europe, was that I would learn how to cook. And it really, at that time, Cornell really did not have a proper cooking class. So the recipe for onion soup my freshman year was find the number 10 can of onion soup, open it, and heat it up. I mean, unfortunately, so I supplemented my education working on the cruise ships and trying to work in kitchens like the Duck Joint, and that was the key for me because I really did want to know the back of the house.
So you graduate Cornell, and what happened?
No, as I'm about to graduate, I'm recruited by 3 companies, none of whom offered me any jobs. Rockefeller Resorts at the time, I would have loved to work in the Tetons or Westin International and Hyatt. I was not offered a job, so. I went back to the well that one summer.
Went back to the cruise.
Well, I worked on the cruises again. Beautiful Mediterranean cruise. I mean, unbelievable. Going through Dubrovnik, which was now Coder Bay and all this. But
you go back to Warner.
Yeah, and I had no job, and I was hired in
Assistant
1978. Assistant restaurant director, making $300 a week.
Changing the light bulbs, doing everything.
Everything. And the waiters back then, by the way, Michael, the waiters would make $300 a night there. This was a restaurant with 250 seats that could do as many as 900 dinners a night. It was just a packed house.
So you leave that and you go to, he's opening up the tavern, and then?
When I graduated, Tavern on the Green had operated for about a year. It opened in 1976. I graduated in 1977. And I'm working for about a year from Maxwell's Plum, and there's an opportunity that arises where I could work in Washington, D.C.
Right, in the Senate.
Dining director, Senate dining rooms. And I had, my brother and I, when we were kids growing up, we always had political interests. My father did some work for the Republican Party at the time, not far from here, actually, on 34th Street. And it just appealed to me to go to Washington and be around all that power and the senators. And what I didn't realize was the director of the Senate dining was very close friends with the general manager of Tavern on the Green. So they chatted, and I get a call from the general manager of Tavern on the Green. He says, I want you to come down and meet with me. And little did I know that they had conspired to keep me in New York. And so I'm now being offered an opportunity to leave the Maxwell's Plum and come to the Tavern on the Green, which, quite frankly,
it was a great experience.
It was a great opportunity, a great experience for me. I went from a restaurant with 250 seats serving 1,000 people a day to a restaurant with 1,000 seats serving almost 2,000 people a day.
And the restaurant grew from $12 million in revenue to 26. And
which I take total responsibility
You take total responsibility. So, but now you still say, I really want to open up a restaurant. I'm tired.
Well, as a young person, and the whole the exposure that my father and mother had given me, it was always in my mind, always, not to do one restaurant, but to do many restaurants.
So let's get to the story. I mean, people will be surprised
Right.
that you were doing the marathon.
Well, when I worked at the Tavern on the Green,
I know,
the finish
because
line
it was the
at
finish line over there, and you do,
and I ran the
as
marathon.
opposed to people having pictures of the kids, you
Right.
showed me the
I could
picture
show it
over
to
there, you know, of you running past
line.
the finish line over there.
Proof.
But, and now what happens is you had left the Tavern, you had become a captain in many of these famous French...
Well, here's the reality. You know, our ego drives us in many ways, and our belief in ourselves drives us in many ways. And so as a young person, I'm going to, you know, inspired by the Muhammad Ali's and inspired by, you know, the Mets of '69 and the Knicks of '69, and, you know, I'm gonna aspire to something great. My mother was an actress, and actors and actresses have big egos. But there was a harsh reality at some point that, am I ever going to be able to do what I think is my, you know, what my goals are? And when I leave the Tavern on the Green, I made a long trip to Europe, which was very inspiring to see all the French restaurants, the 3-star restaurants. And I come back even more resolved to do this. But guess what? No money. Because my parents, you know, my father was on a civil service salary, and my mother worked as a casting director after she was an actress. Never made real money. So I went to work, Le Périgord, La Réserve, Le Régence, La Grenouille. And it was, I jumped out of management, started working quasi-management, because you're a captain in a French restaurant, so you have a responsibility.
And you met all these wealthy people who
Frank
are always
Sinatra,
who are always
you know.
going to help you open up a future restaurant. Right?
All
the
my
money you
clients-
were going to get, right?
All my clients would lean in one day and say, so, you know, if you ever decide to do your own place, give me a call. So finally, you know, I had run the New York Marathon. I was still jogging in rather good condition, not married yet, and I see this neighborhood, you know, and because I lived in the Village, and I run downtown, and then one day, business opportunities, New York Times, 1,500 square feet, $1,500. And I was like, West Broadway, and I was close by, and I go check it out, and then at that point, Lower Manhattan was starting to become interesting. The thoroughfare of West Broadway in Soho was already kind of like a downtown Fifth Avenue. So this says, you know, 239 West Broadway, but little did I know that when I got down there, it was on the other side, i.e. below Canal, Tribeca, below Canal Street. But I look at this space and I said, you know what, I can afford $1,500 a month, although I had nothing, you know, I had maybe $50,000 in life savings. And I signed the lease. And then when I went to those customers who pledged, if you ever want to do something, we'll be there, not one of them wanted to put up any money.
So it's you, a classmate from Cornell. Mom even gave some money.
Right. We
and
raised
the SBS
$150,000.
And the SBA also.
We actually, that was back in the Ronald Reagan era, and we were able to get a, I think it was a
now what
$50,000
happens
SBA loan.
is, so here's this guy, you know, who's what, 28 at this time?
A little bit younger, perhaps. Yeah, about 28. No, that's
About
about
28, and since you like wine, which we'll talk later because you also own Crush besides all the restaurants, Montrachet?
Well, the truth is that I had all this exposure to volume restaurants from the cruise ships and Tavern on the Green Maxwell's. I had made trips to France. I had this exposure to all the great French restaurants. But what I wanted to do was really American. I wanted to do an American restaurant, and a trip to the California, Napa Valley, Sonoma really inspired me. The wines were starting to come out as, you know, very competitive with the great wines of the world. But I was working at La Grenouille, and one night, I'm pouring a bottle of Le Montrachet for a customer, and I'm looking at the label, and it was beautiful color, and it was a very expensive bottle. And I said, you know what? Montrachet. You know, why recreate the wheel at this moment? Why not do something French? Because that's your experience, and you know people gravitate to the French restaurants. But I wanted to do it my way, 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 way cheaper.
$16, right?
When we opened Montrachet in April of 1985, we had 2 prefix menus, $16, $27. Well, there you got lobster and soufflés. Now, meanwhile, La Grenouille, I believe, even in 1980,
75.
well, yeah, $75 a person. So, I mean, I was the crazy Eddie of the restaurant, but again, I had the cheap
My prices
rent
are,
and
no,
then-
but you had this prima donna chef. I mean,
you
people.
say-
No. I mean,
We're on good relations
No,
now.
you
We're
have
on good
good
relationships.
relationships, but you know, you found this
Well, I
no-name
mean-
chef by Daniel Belay.
Well, when I was on the right after I ran the New York Marathon, I took a trip to the West Coast. That's where I saw the great wines of California. And I ate my way from San Diego right up to San Francisco. And ironically, the last meal I had was at a small place in San Francisco called Sutter 500. Roger Verger was doing the consultancy. The chef at the time, who I did not know, today is Hubert Keller, who has been on Master Chefs and now owns Fleur de Lis in his own restaurants. But the sous chef who was the one cooking for me that afternoon was one David Boulay. So, and the meal was so fantastic and so refreshing. But it was French, but it had an American sensibility. That when I got back to New York, I called Boulay up, and we started to conspire to do a restaurant. Then when I found the space and tried to actualize this, David came east. And again, we opened in 1985, Montrachet, April of 1985, on a shoestring, $150,000 of mom's money.
But I think an interesting story about that, and we won't go about the other restaurant, is that within 7 weeks, you were reviewed, and you got 3 stars by the New York Times. But I like the story about Byron Miller, Mr. Benson, with the phone call.
Well, Michael, what happened here was pretty simple. I was at La Grenouille. And one day, I wasn't working. I got a call from one of my fellow captains. Said, "You're not going to believe this. The food critic of the New York Times came in." I said, "Well, how do you know it was the food critic of the New York Times?" He said, "Well, we didn't know because the reservation was made under a fictitious name. But when he came in, he was with Pierre Frenet, who's very recognizable." So I said, "Well, what's that name that he made the reservation on?" He said, "Benson." So I said, "Okay, if you ever get Benson again on the reservation sheet, call me." Now, we're building Montrachet at this time. I bring my tuxedo to the construction site just in the case that maybe this Mr. Benson's going to show up again. I've never seen him. Sure enough, maybe 3 weeks later, true, we have Benson for lunch. Get dressed up in the tuxedo, go into the subway, come out, La Grenouille inside, and there's Mr. Brian Miller, who was the power that ate. He's the food critic of the New York Times. Anyway, fast forward, a year later, let's say, Montrachet is open. I'm putting wine away. I'm paying bills. I'm answering the reservations. A phone call comes. "Hi, there's 2. We'd like to come at 8 o'clock. I'm very sorry, we don't have 8 o'clock. Can you come a little bit earlier?" "Okay, no problem. We'll come earlier." "Okay, sir, what is the name?" "Benson." "Benson." So let me just check. "Oh, why don't you come at 8 o'clock? It's okay." So I had this unbelievable fortune.
Now you also
knowing
that Mr. Benson
took a little work.
No, wait. But you did tell me that Mom's sitting on one side of the.
Well, here's the setup. Yeah, the setup is
setup,
now,
right?
The setup
it's like
is now.
The Sting,
there's always a question of the review, is it accurate? Did the reviews come anonymously? Okay, but if it's a cat and mouse game, we're allowed to play our part. And so I know where I'm going to seat Mr. Benson / Miller. I know that I'll now put my mother and a friend next to him on one side, and on the other side of him, I'm going to put another couple. Why? Just to observe, see if he's eating, enjoying. And sure enough, he comes in, and Mom's on that side, and my other friends are on that side. And I would say about an hour into the meal, my friends get up to leave, and they go outside, and I follow them outside. I said, so what can you tell me? Damn this thing. They're speaking French the whole night.
But your mother was plugging.
Well, on my mother's side, it's like, "Oh, isn't this the most delicious food?" I don't know how much influence, but a little
all I
bit
know
that
is
it
you
might
got
add,
a 3-star in the New York Times.
Well, then 7 weeks, 7 weeks after opening Montrachet, guess what? With the $16 menu, here's the headline: New and French in Lower Manhattan, and they proceed to just rave about Montrachet, 3-star right up. And it was a fantastic out-of-body experience. What I always say, it's like winning the lottery without being able to collect the cash.
Now, the interesting thing is, you were telling me you had this great chef,
fantastic
chef, but you were losing money on him partially because
David has now gone on to obviously his own restaurants. He's very prolific in his own way. But at that time, I used to joke that you had to bring War and Peace to read between courses, because we just had a problem getting the food out of the kitchen.
So let's get to the next restaurant.
I had to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. That's essentially what happened.
So now you have this guy sitting in the back. This guy was this actor by the name of De Niro once.
Well, of course, Montrachet is the hot ticket, and then one day Robert De Niro came in, and it would always be very inconspicuous in the back. but he was dating Tookie Smith, who's the model. And one day she said, Bob wants to know if you'd ever do another restaurant in Tribeca. And I was like, you talking to me? And we walked up the block. He showed me the location, and that was 22 years ago. And we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary now at the Tribeca Grill.
Then you and Bob and a lot of actors went out and opened up Rubicon.
Well, 1994, we opened two special restaurants, Rubicon in San Francisco and Nobu.
Some small,
little
sushi
Japanese
place,
restaurant.
a little sushi restaurant.
Which has grown now to be over a $200 million business with 25 locations around the world.
So you have Nobu, and then what happens is you really create Myriad at the same time.
Well,
you do the consulting business,
yes,
because that's part of this situation.
You know, there was a moment in time where I was saying no to a lot of opportunities and seeing other people seize those opportunities, and not necessarily were those other people clever or better equipped than I was. So I thought about it, and then I created what I call the Myriad Restaurant Group. Myriad meaning endless, countless, the journey we're on. And in the course of the last 25 years, I've opened about 33 restaurants. Places, you mentioned Rubicon in San Francisco. We did Seattle, Washington, Earth and Ocean, Martha's Vineyard, the Coach House, Louisville, Kentucky, Proof on Main.
And you also
all over the place.
Harley Davidson.
Well, yeah, that was a consultancy.
Right, and then Della Femina.
Did Della Femina in East Hampton, which is still there.
And then Nobu 57. Now, you have an interesting life. You have, then you opened up Crush.
I have a wine store called Crush with a childhood friend and a very prolific other partner on 57th Street.
Speaking of childs, you married?
I have a wonderful wife of, I guess it's moving in on 23 years.
Anne?
My wife, Anne, and my two children, Andrew, and he's about to graduate from college, and my daughter, Gabrielle, is about to go to college.
And the Cocker Spaniels?
Oh, the most important thing is Jackson and Chloe, my two Cocker Spaniels.
And you don't like sports too much? Big Jet
totally
fan?
Obsessed. You know, we opened the restaurant in Citi Field for the Mets, Cellar Club. Huge Jet fan, great year. In fact, I'm going to the Super Bowl tomorrow. But I love the Giants and the Jets, and been following football, basketball, love the Knicks, just about everything. And boxing is also very
And you've been involved in lots of charitable endeavors, I know.
That's correct.
Tourette's
just
syndrome.
About everything. The City Meals on Wheels is a big one for us. A lot of autism charities and
So
food people.
this kid, who was working in McDonald's in the grill room. I think you've done a lot over your lifetime.
You know what, Michael? New York is it's just a great city, and I feel very proud that the food culture here, in the 25 some odd years that I've been owning and operating my own restaurants, I've added a little bit of sparkle to that, and I feel good about that.
And thanks for being here today.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, Des Moines Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Wickoff Group.